Hi there, and welcome to Lecture 5 of Unit 6. We're going to continue on with World War I. In the last lecture, we looked at the causes and how the conflict between Serbia and Austria-Hungary and the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, that conflict quickly resulted in a much larger scale problem because of the alliance system and a few other factors. Today we're going to take a look at America and their response to World War I, initially trying to remain neutral, and then some of the key factors in bringing the United States into the war. So when the war broke out, President Woodrow Wilson immediately declared U.S. neutrality. But the United States was not going to remain completely neutral. They hoped to gain some economic progress, have some economic ties with both sides that were at war. Now, the United States had the strongest alliance with Great Britain, and eventually their alliance with Great Britain will bring them into the war. But this idea of trying to remain neutral while at the same time trying to trade war supplies with countries that are at war, we're going to find out pretty quickly that that's not exactly going to work. So some of the causes of the United States entry into the war, and this happened over time. It didn't happen right away. The United States would not officially enter until 1917. And remember, the war broke out in the fall of 1914. So the first cause was German submarine warfare. The Germans were, up against some pretty significant odds, and they were using their subs to torpedo ships bringing supplies to their enemy. And some of those ships just happened to be the United States ships that were carrying supplies and weapons to Britain and some of the other Allied powers. There's a sub there. Like I said before, the United States' biggest alliance was with Great Britain, and the British were doing all that they could through propaganda, through the use of propaganda, to try to sway American public opinion into supporting the war. They took ads out in newspapers and magazines. They dropped leaflets over the United States, portraying Germany as this evil empire trying to overtake the world and such. And so the British, believed that the United States, since we had an alliance with them, should be coming to the aid of the Allied powers in World War I.
You belong with me. You belong with me.
Now, one of the most important factors was the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British passenger liner that was much like the Titanic, and it was traveling from New York to London in 1915 when it was struck by a torpedo of a German sub, and it was sunk. There were over 1,200 people on board, including 115 Americans, and the Germans claimed that they believed that there were weapons or some war materials being transported on this passenger liner, when in fact they were correct. There was small arms ammunition being transported to the Allied powers. So immediately the American public was upset. They cried for retaliation. They cried for war. Wilson still was not ready to get involved in this war. This made it more difficult, and this really changed American public perception of the war, and more Americans supported entering the war after this incident. Here you can see it says Lusitania sunk by a submarine, probably 1,260 dead, twice torpedo off Irish coast, and this is in the New York Times. The Germans did not want anything to do with America entering the war, and they realized they may have made a mistake, so immediately they issued an apology and promised not to sink any more ships without warning. And they would abide by this apology for a short period of time. Eventually they had to continue their method of sinking ships because it really was the only chance that they had of winning the war.
It's too late to apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late.
that song is what I have to say to some of my students. Not to mention any names, but moving on. Remember, we talked in the beginning when the war broke out that Germany was confronted with the problem of fighting a war on two fronts. Well, Russia was not a lot of help to the Allied powers in World War I. They had recently been in a war with Japan in the early 1900s and had never fully recuperated from that. They were on the verge of the Russian Revolution breaking out. There was a lot of internal chaos in Russia. And so Russia initially, when the war first broke out, attacked Germany, but it didn't take the Germans long to halt that attack and then push the Russians back into Russia and start advancing into Russia. So the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1916, the Russians bowed out of the war. They were in trouble. They had all kinds of internal chaos, and so they signed this treaty ending their involvement. And the significance of this is now the Germans could focus on the Western Front. And these were the countries that the United States was more concerned with, France and Great Britain. So once Russia was out of the war, the United States became a little more concerned about their allied powers and their ability to defeat the Germans. Finally, the Zimmermann Note. The Germans were, they were smart, and they had contingency plans, and they came up with this plan as a contingency plan if the United States were to enter the war. And so this was a telegram that was sent from Germany to Mexico asking Mexico to attack the United States if the United States entered the war. And this would be done so there would be a distraction. So the United States would be focused on this and could not send all their troops to Europe to deal with what was going on there. The Germans, in return, after they had taken care of business in Europe, would come over and help the Mexicans regain the land that America had taken from them in the Mexican War, mainly California and the Southwest. The Mexicans said that they were never seriously considered this, and probably, I'm sure they didn't. But again, this is, when you discover intelligence in which a country is asking another country to attack you, that can be problematic. So these are the 5 factors that brought the United States into the war. Again, remember, they didn't happen over time. This was over a period of a few years. The war broke out in 1914. Lusitania was 1915. The Germans were sinking ships 1914, 1915, 1916. The Zimmermann Note was 1916, so it was 1917, April of 1917, before the United States officially declares war. The war had been going on for quite some time. So that wraps up the lecture for today. We have one more lecture on World War I. In that lecture, we'll take a look at the United States involvement in World War I, especially how things changed at home, because there would be some significant changes, how the government handled things and dealt with things in regards to a war on such a grand scale.